The medieval period, spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, witnessed the rise and fall of numerous monarchs who wielded absolute power over their subjects. Among these rulers, some distinguished themselves not only through their political achievements or military conquests, but also through their excessive and often disturbing sexual behaviors that shocked even their contemporaries. These monarchs, protected by the divine right of kings and surrounded by sycophantic courts, often indulged in practices that would be considered criminal by any modern standard. The concept of royal prerogative in medieval society granted kings unprecedented freedom in their personal lives, creating an environment where sexual deviance could flourish unchecked. Unlike common citizens who faced severe punishment for moral transgressions, monarchs operated under different rules, their actions justified by religious doctrine that proclaimed them as God's chosen representatives on earth. This divine protection, combined with unlimited resources and power, created perfect conditions for the emergence of some of history's most notorious sexual predators among the crowned heads of Europe. Understanding these historical figures requires examining not only their actions, but also the social, political, and religious context that enabled their behavior. Medieval society operated under a strict hierarchical system where the king's word was law, and questioning royal authority was tantamount to blasphemy. This system of absolute monarchy, while providing stability and order in many cases, also created opportunities for abuse that would have far-reaching consequences for entire kingdoms. King John of England, who reigned from 1199 to 1216, stands as one of the most documented examples of royal sexual deviance in medieval history. Historical records, including contemporary chronicles and court documents, provide extensive evidence of John's predatory behavior toward the wives and daughters of his nobles. The king operated under the feudal concept of droit du seigneur, or the supposed right of a lord to have sexual relations with subordinate women, though historians debate whether this practice was as widespread as once believed. In John's case, however, the evidence suggests he interpreted this concept in the most literal and brutal manner possible. Contemporary chroniclers, including Matthew Paris and Roger of Wendover, documented numerous instances of King John's sexual assaults against noble women. These accounts describe how the king would deliberately invite noblemen to court, only to assault their female relatives while the men were occupied with royal business. The political implications of these actions were severe, as John's behavior alienated many of his most powerful vassals and contributed significantly to the rebellion that ultimately forced him to sign the Magna Carta in 1215. One of the most well-documented cases involves the wife of William de Bruce, a powerful Norman lord who initially enjoyed royal favor. Historical sources indicate that John's advances toward de Bruce's wife, Maud, and his persistent harassment of the family led directly to their eventual conflict. When de Bruce fell from grace, he and his family fled to Ireland and later to France, where Maud openly accused the king of murdering his nephew Arthur. The king's response was swift and brutal. He had Maud and her eldest son captured and allegedly starved to death in Corfe Castle, demonstrating how John used his royal power to eliminate those who opposed his sexual predations. The king's behavior extended beyond isolated incidents to represent a systematic pattern of sexual exploitation. Court records from the period indicate that John maintained a network of informants who would identify attractive women within noble households, allowing him to target them specifically during court visits or royal progresses. This calculated approach to sexual assault demonstrates that John's actions were not impulsive, but rather represented a deliberate abuse of royal authority for personal gratification. John's sexual excesses also extended to his treatment of hostages, a common practice in medieval politics where noble families would send relatives to court as guarantees of loyalty. Historical evidence suggests that John specifically requested female hostages and that many of these women suffered sexual abuse while under royal protection. This violation of the sacred trust between lord and vassal further undermined John's political position and contributed to the growing resistance among his nobles. The international implications of John's behavior became apparent in his conflicts with the church. When Archbishop Stephen Langton and other ecclesiastical authorities attempted to intervene on behalf of victimized women, John's response was to confiscate church properties and exile clerical critics. This conflict with religious authority, combined with his sexual crimes, created a broader coalition of opposition that included both secular and religious leaders. Contemporary foreign chronicles also documented John's reputation beyond England's borders. French and German sources describe how John's sexual behavior became a source of diplomatic embarrassment, with foreign courts refusing to send female members of their households to England for fear of royal assault. This isolation further weakened John's international position during his conflicts with King Philip Augustus of France and contributed to his military defeats in Normandy and other continental possessions. The long-term consequences of John's sexual predations extended far beyond his personal reign. The systematic abuse of noble women created lasting resentment among powerful families, many of whom would continue to oppose royal authority long after John's death. This legacy of mistrust contributed to the ongoing constitutional conflicts between the English monarchy and nobility that characterized much of the 13th century. Economic factors also played a role in John's ability to engage in systematic sexual abuse. The king used his control over royal finances to reward those who facilitated his access to women, while punishing families who resisted his advances through excessive taxation or property confiscation. This economic coercion created a climate of fear that enabled John's continued predatory behavior, while simultaneously undermining the feudal system's foundation of mutual obligation and trust. The documentation of John's crimes in contemporary sources provides invaluable insight into how medieval society processed and recorded royal sexual deviance. While chroniclers of the period often use coded language or religious metaphors to describe sexual crimes, the consistency and detail of accounts regarding John's behavior suggest that his actions were so egregious that they could not be ignored or sanitized by royal propaganda. Modern historians have debated the extent to which John's sexual behavior influenced major political developments of his reign, but the weight of evidence suggests that his predatory actions played a significant role in undermining royal authority and contributing to the constitutional crisis that produced the Magna Carta. The principle that even kings must be subject to law, enshrined in that document, emerged partly as a response to John's systematic abuse of royal prerogative in pursuing his sexual gratification. The Byzantine Empire, heir to the Eastern Roman tradition, produced its own share of sexually deviant monarchs, with Emperor Justinian II representing one of the most extreme examples of imperial perversion combined with political tyranny. Ruling during two separate periods, 685 to 695 and 705 to 711, Justinian II's sexual excesses were intrinsically linked to his brutal political methods, creating a reign of terror that ultimately contributed to the empire's decline during a crucial period in medieval history. Byzantine court sources, including the writings of Theophanes the Confessor and the Chronographia, provide detailed accounts of Justinian II's sexual behavior, which began early in his first reign and escalated dramatically after his restoration to power following a decade in exile. The emperor's perversions took multiple forms, including the systematic sexual exploitation of palace servants, the wives of court officials, and even members of religious orders who came under imperial jurisdiction. One of the most disturbing aspects of Justinian II's behavior was his use of imperial religious authority to facilitate sexual crimes. As emperor, he held significant influence over the Eastern Orthodox Church and used this power to demand access to convents and monasteries under the pretext of religious inspection. Historical sources document numerous instances where the emperor violated his sacred duty to protect religious communities, instead using his visits to assault nuns and female religious personnel. The emperor's sexual predations extended to his treatment of foreign diplomatic personnel, creating international incidents that damaged Byzantine relations with neighboring powers. Contemporary Arab and Bulgarian sources describe how Justinian II's inappropriate behavior toward female members of diplomatic missions led to the breakdown of crucial treaty negotiations and contributed to military conflicts that further weakened the empire's position. Justinian II's second reign, beginning in 705 after his dramatic return from exile, marked an escalation in both his political brutality and sexual deviance. Having suffered mutilation during his overthrow, his nose was cut off, earning him the nickname Rhinot Meadows, or the Noseless. The emperor returned with an obsessive desire for revenge that manifested in increasingly violent sexual crimes against those he perceived as enemies or their families. The emperor's establishment of a secret police force, tasked with identifying and capturing perceived enemies, also served his sexual predations. This organization, operating throughout the empire, would identify attractive women within families suspected of disloyalty and arrange for their transportation to Constantinople under various pretexts. Once in the capital, these women faced systematic sexual abuse while their families remained unaware of their fate. Court documents from the period reveal that Justinian II maintained elaborate facilities within the Great Palace specifically designed for sexual torture and abuse. These chambers, described in contemporary accounts as lavishly decorated but equipped with restraining devices and torture implements, served as venues for the emperor's most extreme sexual crimes. The existence of such facilities demonstrates the premeditated and systematic nature of Justinian II's sexual deviance. The emperor's behavior also extended to his treatment of children, with multiple sources documenting his sexual abuse of minors from noble families brought to court as pages or hostages. This violation of imperial duty to protect young people under royal care created particular outrage among the Byzantine aristocracy and contributed significantly to the growing opposition that would eventually lead to his final overthrow and execution. Moving westward, the Frankish kingdoms produced King Chilperic I of Neustria, whose reign from 561 to 584 was characterized by extreme sexual violence and political instability. Contemporary sources, particularly Gregory of Tours in his History of the Franks, provide extensive documentation of Chilperic's sexual crimes and their impact on Merovingian political structures. Chilperic's sexual deviance manifested primarily through his serial marriages and the systematic murder of wives who displeased him or stood in the way of new romantic obsessions. His marriage to Galswintha, sister of the Visigothic Queen Brunhild, ended in the bride's murder shortly after the wedding, apparently to clear the way for Chilperic's relationship with his former concubine Fredegund. This crime had international ramifications, leading to decades of warfare between the Frankish kingdoms and contributing to the broader instability of Merovingian rule. The king's relationship with Fredegund itself became a source of ongoing sexual violence and political manipulation. Contemporary sources describe how the couple collaborated in eliminating rivals through a combination of sexual entrapment and assassination. Fredegund would identify attractive women who might threaten her position, and Chilperic would arrange their sexual assault and subsequent murder, often involving elaborate tortures designed to satisfy his sadistic impulses. Gregory of Tours documents numerous specific instances of Chilperic's sexual crimes, including his assault on the daughter of a prominent Gallo-Roman senator and his systematic rape of women from religious communities. These actions violated both secular and religious law, creating opposition among both the Frankish nobility and the increasingly powerful Christian church. The king's sexual behavior also extended to his treatment of slaves and servants within the royal household. Archaeological evidence from Frankish royal sites, combined with contemporary written sources, suggests that Chilperic maintained extensive networks of sexual slaves, many obtained through raids on neighboring territories or purchased from human traffickers operating throughout early medieval Europe. One particularly well-documented case involves Chilperic's obsession with a young woman named Bina, daughter of King Childebert I's former concubine. Historical sources describe how Chilperic's pursuit of this woman led to a complex web of political and sexual manipulation that ultimately resulted in multiple murders and contributed to the ongoing civil wars that characterized later Merovingian rule. The international implications of Chilperic's sexual behavior became apparent in his conflicts with the Visigothic kingdom in Spain. Queen Brunhild, sister of the murdered Galswintha, spent decades orchestrating revenge against Chilperic and Fredegund, leading to wars that devastated large portions of what is now France and contributed to the eventual collapse of effective Merovingian royal authority. Contemporary church sources provide additional insight into Chilperic's sexual crimes through records of ecclesiastical attempts to intervene on behalf of victims. Bishops and abbots throughout Neustria repeatedly protested the king's behavior, leading to conflicts between royal and religious authority that further undermined political stability throughout the kingdom. The economic impact of Chilperic's sexual behavior was also significant, as the king used royal resources to maintain extensive networks of sexual slaves and to reward those who facilitated his access to victims. This diversion of royal wealth contributed to the financial difficulties that plagued later Merovingian rulers and limited their ability to maintain effective military and administrative systems. Modern archaeological investigations at Frankish royal sites have uncovered evidence supporting contemporary written accounts of Chilperic's sexual crimes. Excavations at palace complexes have revealed chambers specifically designed for imprisonment and torture, along with mass burial sites containing the remains of numerous young women who appear to have died violent deaths during the period of Chilperic's reign. The legacy of Chilperic's sexual predations extended far beyond his assassination in 584, contributing to patterns of violence and instability that would characterize Frankish politics for generations. The normalization of sexual violence within royal courts, exemplified by Chilperic's behavior, created precedents that later Merovingian and Carolingian rulers would struggle to overcome in their attempts to establish stable governmental systems. The later medieval period witnessed the emergence of increasingly sophisticated monarchical systems, yet these developments did not eliminate royal sexual deviance. Instead, more complex administrative structures often provided enhanced opportunities for systematic sexual exploitation, as demonstrated by the reign of King Pedro the Cruel of Castile, 1350 to 1369. Whose sexual crimes became intertwined with the broader political conflicts that characterized 14th-century Iberian politics. Pedro's sexual behavior differed from earlier medieval monarchs in its calculated integration with political strategy. Rather than simply pursuing immediate gratification, Pedro used sexual violence as a deliberate tool of political control, systematically targeting the female relatives of potential rivals and using sexual humiliation as a means of asserting dominance over the Castilian nobility. This approach represented an evolution in royal sexual deviance, demonstrating how later medieval monarchs learned to weaponize their predatory impulses in service of broader political objectives. Contemporary Iberian chronicles, including those by Pedro López de Ayala and other court historians, document numerous instances of Pedro's sexual crimes, though often in coded language designed to avoid direct confrontation with royal authority. These sources describe how Pedro established a systematic network for identifying and capturing attractive women from noble families, using his expanding bureaucratic apparatus to facilitate these crimes while maintaining plausible deniability. The king's most notorious sexual crime involved his assault on Leonor de Guzman's daughters, relatives of his father's former mistress. This attack served multiple purposes, allowing Pedro to satisfy his sexual urges while simultaneously humiliating a family that represented a potential threat to his political authority. The systematic nature of these assaults, conducted over several months and involving multiple victims, demonstrates the premeditated character of Pedro's sexual violence. Pedro's sexual behavior also extended to his treatment of Muslim and Jewish women within his territories, exploiting religious and ethnic minorities who had limited legal recourse against royal crimes. Contemporary sources describe how the king used religious persecution as a pretext for sexual assault, claiming that his actions served Christian purposes while actually satisfying his personal desires. This combination of sexual and religious violence created lasting trauma within minority communities and contributed to the broader social instability that characterized Pedro's reign. The international dimensions of Pedro's sexual crimes became apparent during his conflicts with his half-brother Henry of Trastamara and the broader European powers that supported opposing sides in the Castilian Civil War. French and English sources document how Pedro's reputation for sexual violence became a diplomatic liability, making it difficult to secure foreign support and contributing to his eventual isolation and defeat. Moving to Northern Europe, King Erik VII of Denmark, 1396 to 1439, represents another evolution in medieval royal sexual deviance, demonstrating how the increasing complexity of late medieval court systems could facilitate systematic sexual exploitation. Erik's crimes were notable for their international scope, as his position as ruler of the Kalmar Union allowed him to victimize women across Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Erik's sexual behavior was characterized by its systematic targeting of the wives and daughters of prominent merchants and minor nobles, groups that had gained political and economic prominence during the late medieval commercial revolution but lacked the traditional protections afforded to high nobility. This calculated approach allowed Erik to satisfy his sexual urges while avoiding direct confrontation with the most powerful elements of Scandinavian society. Contemporary Scandinavian sources, including the chronicles of Danish and Swedish monasteries, provide detailed accounts of Erik's sexual crimes and their impact on the political stability of the Kalmar Union. These sources describe how Erik's behavior created resentment among the merchant classes that were crucial to the economic prosperity of his kingdoms, contributing to the tax rebellions and administrative failures that characterized his later reign. The king's establishment of a traveling court system, ostensibly designed to improve royal administration throughout his territories, actually served to facilitate his sexual predations. Erik would arrive in towns and cities with advance notice, allowing his agents to identify attractive women who could be summoned to court under various pretexts. This systematic approach to sexual assault demonstrates the sophisticated methods that late medieval monarchs could employ in pursuing their criminal objectives. Erik's sexual behavior also extended to his treatment of foreign diplomatic personnel and merchants, creating international incidents that damaged the Kalmar Union's commercial relationships with other European powers. German and English sources describe how Erik's inappropriate behavior toward female members of trading delegations led to the breakdown of crucial commercial agreements and contributed to the economic difficulties that plagued his reign. The king's most notorious crime involved his systematic sexual assault of nuns from the Byzantine Order, a Swedish religious community that had gained international prominence during the 14th century. This violation of religious sanctuary created particular outrage among contemporary observers and contributed to Erik's eventual excommunication by the Catholic Church, further undermining his political authority throughout Scandinavia. The documentation of Erik's sexual crimes in contemporary sources provides insight into how late medieval society processed and recorded royal sexual deviance. Unlike earlier periods where such behavior might be ignored or minimized by chroniclers, the increasing literacy and administrative sophistication of the 15th century created more comprehensive records of royal crimes and their political consequences. The economic impact of Erik's sexual behavior was also more clearly documented than in earlier periods, with surviving financial records showing how the king diverted royal resources to maintain networks of informants and facilitators who assisted in his sexual crimes. These expenditures contributed to the fiscal crises that plagued Erik's later reign and ultimately led to his deposition and exile. The final example of medieval royal sexual deviance comes from 15th century Eastern Europe, where Vlad III of Wallachia, known as Vlad the Impaler, 1448 to 1476, combined extreme sexual violence with the brutal political methods that made him infamous in European history. While Vlad is best known for his practice of impalement as a form of execution and torture, contemporary sources also document his systematic sexual abuse of female captives and political prisoners. Vlad's sexual crimes were notable for their integration with his broader program of political terror, using sexual violence as both a personal gratification and a tool of psychological warfare against his enemies. Contemporary Ottoman, Hungarian, and German sources describe how Vlad would systematically assault the female relatives of political prisoners before executing their male family members, creating a climate of terror that extended far beyond his immediate victims. The prince's establishment of elaborate torture chambers within his various strongholds served both his political and sexual objectives, with surviving architectural evidence suggesting that these facilities were designed to facilitate both public executions and private sexual assaults. This combination of political and sexual violence represented the culmination of medieval royal deviance, demonstrating how absolute power could corrupt rulers in the most fundamental ways. The international implications of Vlad's sexual behavior became apparent in contemporary diplomatic correspondence, where European powers expressed concern about his treatment of female captives and diplomatic personnel. These concerns contributed to Vlad's political isolation and limited his ability to secure foreign support in his conflicts with the Ottoman Empire. The legacy of these medieval monarchs extends far beyond their immediate historical periods, providing crucial insights into the relationship between absolute power and human corruption. Their systematic sexual crimes demonstrate how the medieval concept of divine right monarchy, while providing political stability in many cases, also created opportunities for abuse that would have lasting consequences for the development of European political systems. The documentation of these crimes in contemporary sources also reveals the gradual evolution of medieval society's ability to recognize, record, and ultimately resist royal sexual deviance. While early medieval chroniclers often minimized or ignored such behavior, later sources provide increasingly detailed and critical accounts, suggesting a growing awareness that even divinely appointed monarchs could be held accountable for their actions. Understanding these historical examples remains relevant for modern discussions of power and accountability, demonstrating how institutional systems that concentrate authority without adequate checks and balances can facilitate systematic abuse. The medieval experience of royal sexual deviance provides valuable lessons about the importance of legal frameworks that protect vulnerable populations regardless of the perpetrator's political status.